Hello, in this video we'll take a look at how you can use the jQuery client grid and connect to a JSON data that's available on the client within the browser. So what I have in front of me is a new MVC project in Visual Studio 2010. We're not going to be using MVC here, but just so that we have a project and we have the ability to run the application, we'll use MVC template. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to add a new HTML page to my project, and it's going to be all based on the client, so I don't need any server dependency, any MVC views. I'm going to call this page the jQuery grid with JSON data. Okay, add that to my project. Now it's a blank HTML page. In order to get started, all I need is JavaScript and CSS references so that when I run my client code, I'm able to connect or bind my grid and also make it look better using CSS. So in my Solution Explorer, I've already pulled in the necessary JavaScript and CSS files from the Infogesics install location so that it's now just a drag and drop operation for me. In the scripts folder, I can take, you'll see that there's an IG folder which contains all the JavaScript files for the Infogesics controls. I'm going to take the igui.min.js and put it right here in my head. And because it has a dependency on the jQuery JavaScript files, I'll need those as well. So I'm going to come back here. Now these are part of the actual MVC project template itself. So I can just drag those in. And it also has a dependency on the jQuery UI because all the controls internally use that framework. So I'll bring that in as well. Now one more thing I need here is that the jQuery grid also makes use of the Microsoft jQuery templates, and which is available off of their CDN. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to come to my notepad where I have all the links. I'm going to take this link and just with like everything else, I'm going to put that in as well. Alright, so as far as JavaScript references are concerned, these 4 references are going to give me all that I need on my client side and for my code to run. The next thing is to get the appropriate CSS files into the project as well. So I'm going to come back to my Solution Explorer. Now in this case, I can go to my content folder, which is also a default folder created by the MVC project template, and I have already put in the Infogesics CSS files in there. So there are 2 things that I need. I can go to the IG folder and drag and drop the jQuery UI.custom.css, which is shared by all the controls. And also in the base folder, I can put this as ig.ui.min.css, and this defines all the CSS settings for all the different controls. Now, even though I'm going to be using this page for the grid, but really you can now use any Infogesics controls on the client side, and you don't need to add any additional references or CSS settings. Alright, so once I have that set up, let me put a placeholder for my grid. So I can put a table with an ID of igGrid, and this is my placeholder. And now I can actually start scripting the page and create the JSON data and attach it to my grid. So I'm going to create a script tag, and I'm going to copy and paste some code in here. And you can see up here is my JSON array that I've already created, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. So I'm going to paste that in. And what I'm doing here is I'm creating a new variable with the name data source, and all it contains is the actual JSON array that has all my data. And the way the data is formatted is it has an ID, it has a product description, a product ID, and a price to it. And the pattern repeats for the entire data structure. If I go and look at the pretty much the last record, it has the same definition, an ID, name, and the price. So that's what my data looks like. And now what I need is to initialize my grid. So I can use the jQuery onReady function and really put my code in here. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use the ID selector. We call our grid, or give the ID of igGrid, and you will see that I can just call the igGrid method here, and what it's going to do is it's going to convert this object at the bottom into an InfoGistics grid, and I can now go ahead and add some options to it. Now, just for the sake of time, I'm going to come down to my notepad again, and I'm going to copy and paste the snippet of igGrid. So I'm going to put it in here. Alright, so let's go through that. So again, we took the ID of the actual grid element at the bottom, and then we're converting into an InfoGistics grid just by calling this method. What we're doing here is, we know in our JSON array we have a field for product ID, we have a field for product name, product number, and the cost, and we are using the columns collection to basically create those column definition for our data structure, and so that the grid creates appropriate columns. You're also enabling sorting, so the other options that you have in the grid when you're initializing the control is you have another collection called features, where you can go in there and kind of add features to the control. So here we're basically adding paging, sorting. It's all local because our array is completely on the client, so it doesn't have to make a server callback when the paging or sorting happens. And we're setting auto-generate columns to false because we've already defined it up here. We're setting the data source to be the data source attribute to be data source.records, and the height of the grid. So if we go up there, just to kind of make sure that our data source contains a records object that contains everything related to the data. So that's all we had to do in order to create a completely client-side jQuery grid. And we right-click and view it in browser. And here you see that just by taking all the required JavaScript files, the CSS references, and putting a placeholder for the grid in the DOM, and using the client scripting, I was able to create a nice looking JavaScript-based jQuery grid using the InfoGistics grid in NetAdvantage for jQuery. So again, you have all the standard features like number of pages the user want to change. Let's say I want to see all the pages or 50 records per page. I can do that pretty easily. I have sorting now enabled, so I can click on my header to sort. Just by setting up those two couple of lines in our initialization code, sorting is enabled on the grid. And all the settings are being taken care of using CSS. Thanks for watching.
InfoGistics. On the web at infragistics.com.